Thank you so much. A very gracious introduction. Really lovely to see all of you here today. I have, as you know from my work on WBZ, I've covered the Oscars, the Emmys, the Tonys, the Grammys, and tonight it's TCAN, the Center for the Arts in Natick. And I'm really smiling about that because actually what you've done here is extraordinary. I mean, I have to say I'm kind of blown away by the numbers you cited, by the kind of subscription base you have, by the numbers of performances that you have here. And I was absolutely blown away by the quality of that video piece, the people who are in it, and what was communicated there. I want to specifically acknowledge Ricky and Kathy and David and Steve and all of the trustees and all of the board members and all of you who volunteer to keep a place like this going, because it is extremely difficult. You get very little help, and these are tough times. We don't have to say that anymore. I mean, we all know that. The last time I was on this stage, I was with Eve Budnick and Opera del West, which was so fantastic. And again, another uplifting, just inspiring production that involved kids from the community and adults from the community. It was really amazing. So what you've got here is really extraordinary, and I completely applaud and support your mission. I guess I'm sort of preaching to the converted tonight. I mean, that group of people who stood up here was very impressive. And the people on the video who articulated what the arts are all about, again, very impressive and very moving. What I thought I'd just tell you about was why I think the arts are so important. And I think sometimes that's difficult to quantify. Everybody's very willing to sort of pay lip service to that. Oh, we need the arts, and yes, we must have the arts. And of course, it's always the first thing to get cut, and it's considered a frill. And it's very hard to get your arms around, like, well, why do we need the arts? Is little Joey gonna grow up and be a ballet dancer, really? Is little Mary gonna play the flute and make a living at that? Well, maybe not, So why should we be giving her tap dancing lessons and, all the, why do we need these arts? What is that all about? Some of us know it. Sometimes we try to sort of make the arts have to pay off in other ways, like, oh, if we teach our kids arts, they'll be able to solve elaborate computer problems later on, or they'll be able to solve emotional problems, or, that somehow the arts have to be put to some other kind of use, that the arts for art's sake is not enough, or again, difficult to quantify. So I'm just going to tell you what the arts have always meant to me as a kid growing up in 5 rooms in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I didn't grow up in some Tony little suburb. I grew up in Fairfield County, Connecticut, but it was the ass end of Fairfield County. And you can quote me on that. Tough working class family. Both my parents worked really hard. Come from a long line of working women. My grandmother was one of the founders of the International Ladies Garment Workers Union. But what was really important in our family, and I have to credit my mother with this, was bringing the arts in. We always had plenty of really good food. I was raised Italian and Polish. That was an art form in and of itself. We always had a lot of really nice clothes because my dad worked for a retail outlet, and we had the arts. My mother gave me ballet lessons and tap lessons and piano lessons. I was my parish church organist and soloist. I used to dream about being either a nun or an actress. I wasn't sure which one of those. And actually, I think they're kind of related. Both very mysterious and dramatic, And actually, I've taken some of my fashion cues from the nuns. All that black and white, Then they changed that habit, and I lost my vocation completely. But my mother took me to my first symphony. She took me to my first play. I went to my first opera. I always loved the movies. She took me to my first movie. I loved stories. I loved the power of narrative. I loved the idea that there was meaning everywhere, that the world seemed to be full of meaning, and that for me there was always more truth in a novel than in the newspaper. And that is definitely still true for me today, even though I worked on a news team for so many years. I just always felt intuitively that this was something I just gravitated toward, and it just felt as natural as breathing. I know that for a lot of kids, this is what the arts is. I guess I have to say that for me, it was the first time that I had a sense that the world was much larger than what I could see immediately around me. That the world was a very big, big place, and that it was full of infinite possibilities. And that possibilities that I hadn't even conceived of. You could see them you'd see them in stage, or you'd hear a piece of music which would evoke certain kinds of ideas or feelings. Sometimes the arts, for me, could express my deepest hopes, my deepest fears, my longings, my dreams, and yes, even some problems. I mean, somehow it was a way of some of the deepest part of myself coming out. Shakespeare said it's like holding a mirror up to life. I've always said that the arts are a way that a culture has of talking to itself. When you go to a play, when you go to the movies, when you go to a concert, it's like you're seeing something reflected back to you that gives you something that you didn't have before. And I think for a lot of kids, it may be the only way that they can actually express the deepest part of themselves, their most unique voice. Some kids who just don't fit into any particular category, or maybe they do, but there's something more that needs to come out. There's something more that can only be expressed in a particular way, and that is through the arts. When I was covering the arts for Channel 4, I remember a very powerful night when I went to Dorchester and I was covering a group of kids who were studying hip-hop. And they actually were competing in a big national thing that was on television, and they actually I think they came in second. But these were kids who came from the toughest part of Boston. They told me, quite frankly, they were teenagers, I'm going to say anywhere from 14 to 18. They were kids who they told me would be in gangs. They had broken homes. They didn't necessarily have a place to go after school. They might have been involved in drugs if it hadn't been for this after-school program. And as I went down the row, and I talked to about 5 of them that night, I asked them what this meant to them, to work this hard, to create these dances, to give these performances. One boy said to me, this isn't just some kind of show we're putting on. This is our life. This is our life. They were dancing their lives. I was talking to a poet friend of mine, and I said, Barbara, why do you think we need the arts? What is that? And she said, I think it's because when you encourage someone along these lines, what you're really doing is encouraging them to nurture their unique voice. And when you do that, not only does that person have a respect for their own voice and who they are, but I think it leads to compassion, because then they have a respect for the other unique voices around them. That we are not all cut from the same cloth, and that we're all sort of trying to do like the same kind of thing, just sort of be ourselves, and to realize that at its highest level. I had another thought, and this happened around 9/11. And I actually found myself in New York City on that day. I actually flew in. I was flying in that morning for, a totally kind of fun reason, and found myself on the ground actually covering that event. Even though I was an arts and entertainment critic, I was one of the few who was like on the ground right then. And I got back to town, and of course there was, massive global reaction to what had happened. And I was noticing what went on around that. And I noticed that all of the sporting events, stopped. They were closed down. But all of the theaters stayed open. There was a sense that people needed to go to the theater. That somehow it was more than just entertainment, and it's certainly entertainment, but that people go to the theater for reasons larger than that. People go to have a sense of community, to have a sense of insight, to be uplifted, to be inspired, to have some insight about the human condition. And that somehow our connection through events like this are very, very powerful, and we crave them on a deeply intuitive, intrinsic level. And I think kids instinctively gravitate toward this. I mean, we all get that life is difficult, that life is hard, that not everything is wonderful, and that somehow the arts allow us to get a grip on that and approach that creatively and absorb it, and then somehow process that and turn it back out in some other form that creates an incredible, powerful dialogue that we can all participate in, and we're all the better for it. It's tough to quantify this, but that's about as much as I can say about that right now. I do know that it was my favorite thing to do every single night on the news. I can tell you that, and you all know, that, what counts as news these days is very, very bad, generally. I was always the last thing on the news. I was preceded by the robberies, the murders, the violence, the catastrophes, personal and private. And then I would come on and I would deliver the good news. The good news, which was about the artists and their work, so important to our lives every single day. Not just that they entertained us, but they did so much more. And every artist that I've ever asked that question about, Rudolf Nureyev, I remember asking him why he danced. He said it was his passion, it was from his soul, it was his life. I remember asking Twyla Tharp where her dances came from. She said, well, for lack of a better word, they come from God. I asked Sting, where do the songs come from? He said, I feel like they're out there, and I tune them in. There's something powerful at work here. I think everybody in this room gets that. I just want to say that I support you. I applaud this beautiful mission. I'm so glad you spent a long time on the language. I think if you can't even begin to try to measure it, you can't grow it. You can't do anything about it. And I love language. I love to talk. My mother said I spoke early and very clearly. Yeah. We believe the arts are essential to a complete human experience and to the creation of a vibrant, healthy community. We know it, we live it, we eat it, we breathe it, we sleep it. We know that this is the truth. And I commend you for living that truth. And I think the young woman on this video whose eyes welled up with tears, how do you put that into words? Well, you don't, but we all got it. Thank you for everything you do here. I am 100% in your corner, and call on me. Thank you. Thank you.